Okay, guys, welcome to the Prophetic Outlook. And tonight we are going to be talking about the Illuminati. We are going to be taking a look at the commissioned kind of works plan that we know that's already available for anybody who has an eye to see and an ear to hear, someone who will search it out. That there is a commission plan that was commissioned initially by the Rothschilds May 1st, 1776, for Adam Weishaupt to actually develop these plans. And I want you to listen to them and see if you can connect the dots as to the time and the period that we're in right now. Do you see these plans in action? Do you see them in political policy, in geopolitical posturing and movement? Do you see them in, the religious capitulation of the day? What do you see? And to do this, to look at this, I want to sort of first start with the Word of God, and I want to start with Genesis chapter 11, because when we look at a blueprint for certainly what the organization, the Illuminati, and those of, a Luciferian elite are looking for, we can see the blueprint found in the Bible, and God does this for us so that we can recognize, we can spot what is seen as the prophetic Moedim, the cyclical reoccurrence of events that point in a direction of the unveiling and unfolding of prophecy. So if we look at the Tower of Babel, we see the first sort of globalist rebellion against God. Not talking about the sin rebellion that we see in Genesis 6 or the rebellion of the corrupt in Genesis 3, but I'm talking about the globalist rebellion, as in the idea to go against God's command to spread out and subdue the earth in Genesis chapter 10. But in Genesis 11, instead what we see is they congregate in the valley of Shinar. Now, even if you take the etymology of the word Shinar, we know that we can break down the etymology as to the land of unwelcomed negative emotions. Okay, so that is when we break down the etymology of the word Shinar. So it's a land in which people are, continually complaining, murmuring, as we see in the Old Testament, being something that certainly is not beneficial to do, that we see the Israelites do. But this seems to be an incorporation in a global sense. And when they go and they meet in the Valley of Shinar, we know Shinar is the valley in the area associated with Semiramis. So you can automatically see the connection there, okay? Semiramis, the mother of Nimrod, the wife of Nimrod, later the wife of Tammuz, their child, also deified as Astarte and Ishtar, this female goddess type, this, idea of the Queen of Heaven, and that is where we get the continuation of what will be revealed in Revelation 17, the harlot of Babylon. Because if you were to identify who the harlot of Babylon was as a person, you would identify it right back to Semiramis. Now, this is interesting, right? Because, and I'm not even started here, but if you go to Revelation chapter 3, the area of Thyatira that that is identified as, or is it, let me see, I think it's maybe Genesis 2 actually from memory, or sorry, Revelation 2, just bear with me. The area of Thyatira is actually the area of Semiramis, okay? And that's interesting because we look at that is the identification of the Thyatiran church is the corrupt church. Yeah, it's Revelation 2:18. And to the angel of the church of Thyatira, write these things, says the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire and feet like fine brass. I know your oida, I know your works. Oida is the Greek word for he knows intimately your works. I know your works, love, service, faith, and patience. And as for your works, the last are more than the first. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel. Now, Jezebel is kind of during the time of First Kings is this individual who comes out under Baal worship, and it can be seen as synonymous with the harlot of Babylon in motive and commission and what she does, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach, seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and eat the things sacrificed to idols. So I just find it interesting when we're looking at Genesis 11 that Semiramis is actually also the name of the area of the church of Thyatira. Okay, and Semiramis in Genesis 11 is the, I guess, first prophetic picture of the harlot of Babylon, this end time false religion that is mixing and meshing things. And again, I personally believe that we're seeing the rise of that now. And as we're seeing the rise of that, we're also seeing the rise of globalism. We're seeing the rise of a demonic agenda. And like I said, we will look at the Illuminati plans that Adam Weishaupt was commissioned to write and put down in paper by the Rothschilds on May 1st, 1776. But let's get to Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east. Now, if you look in the Old Testament, and you get anything sort of dictating a journey from the east, that is a journey away from God and away from the presence of God. And when you talk about journeying from the east, it is talking about going into the sinful nature of man. Okay, so that's the typology of that. We know that that was certainly the direction that Adam and Eve took from the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, and it was to go journeying from the east. So this is kind of because the garden was east of Eden, okay, in the east of Eden. So when you look at that, you understand there's already a spiritual picture for us to see here, that these people decided to draw away from the presence of God. And as they tried to draw away from the presence of God, they congregated together in a land signified by negative emotions. In other words, they're being ruled and run by these negative emotions. Now we see this in Romans 1. God says, because you choose not to keep me in your knowledge, so you choose to remove God from your thinking, from your reasoning. Like we see now, removed from the classroom, removed from the social square, removed from the Senate, removed from Congress, removed from different places. They remove God. Then what happens is he leaves them over to a debased mind. And listen, if we know the presence of God, Psalm 16:11 represents the fullness of joy. The further you move away from him, the less joy there will be in your life. They move away to the place of Shinar, the valley of Shinar, synonymous with Semiramis, the picture of the harlot. Okay, so what I'm trying to say, basically, the more you move your thinking, your reasoning, your walk, your daily life away from God, the more you're entering into the negative realm, the negative emotion realm that is corrupted by your fleshly leading. And remember, Romans 8:14 says that as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. And then you're led off astray into the harlot's realm, into the harlot of Babylon, into the wickedness of that idolatry and that idolatrous religion. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had bricks for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city. Now, again, that word city, we've talked about this before. If you take the word city in Hebrew, it is the word ear, right? I-Y-R, ear. It is also synonymous with the word for watcher. Okay, because when we see in Daniel 4, it is the same word in Daniel 4 when the term watcher is used. Normally that term is kind of left to the apocryphal books of Enoch, but in Daniel 10 or Daniel 4 it is used, and it is the word ear. It is that connection in that terms. Come, let us build ourselves a city. Let us build ourselves a city under the guise of the demonic realm. I've probably lost everybody because I'm not going by notes. I'm just reading this, and this is what I'm sort of bringing out here, or God's bringing out with this. let us make a name for ourselves. So it's that same old thing back to Genesis 3, that same old lie, let us make ourselves gods. Let us make ourselves in our image. Now you can understand that whenever you look at the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel, I don't even know if I've got a picture here. Hold on. My computer's a wee bit slow, so hopefully that will come up. But if I don't have a picture, you know what the Tower of Babel looks like. And I think it was 1556. They brought there was an artistic rendition of the Tower of Babel, and the EU headquarters are, I guess, an imitation of that. And let me just see if I've got. They're an imitation of that. Yeah, here we go. Hold on. And it's this sort of circular style. It's this it's a ziggurat. It's an idea of a meeting place between heaven and earth. Now, if you look at this under the context of Genesis 28, you know that when Jacob fell asleep on the Mount of Olives, he looks over and sees Mount Moriah, and he sees a ladder going between heaven and earth. Now, the ladder between heaven and earth shows you that God is using that place and that land and that area to bless the world through. It becomes a portal, a window, a gate from heaven. But if you look at the construct of this and the cyclical construct of this, it has a depiction of something else for me. This is what we call a DNA tower. So a DNA tower based off the strands of or the double helix, the DNA construction, and you can see how the actual Tower of Babel could be, in some terms, the idea of reaching God through DNA manipulation, something that we know is foretold in Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. So, in other words, the end days, the eschatos, is related to what we see during the time of Noah. And if you look at the book of Joshua, we know that there was genetic manipulation. If you look at Genesis 6, we know that there was genetic manipulation through the unholy union between fallen angels, watchers, a year, and the daughters of men. So you see that the Tower of Babel is again this idea to go back to the Genesis 3 lie that the serpent sold to Adam and Eve, that you can be like gods. And now we're seeing that, I personally believe, manifesting in the idea with genetic manipulation, like people like Yuval Noah Harari have said, that we too will become gods. In other words, that we will be our own gods. Why? Because they believe that they can splice DNA, splice the genetics to create longevity, if not immortality, and all of that nonsense. But all of that to be said, that you can see the Tower of Babel is a rebellion against creation, a rebellion against the truth of God. And this is something that we see with the Illuminati. So the Illuminati, I know, is thing of legend and all of this. The idea that there's this secret society, but the secret society, unfortunately, is not that secret anymore. And we can look at the 25 tenets or sort of strategized plan that Adam Weishaupt was commissioned to write on behalf of the Rothschilds. And like I said, that's May 1st, 1776. So the first one that we read, and I'm paraphrasing some of these because they're a little bit longer, but to use violence and terrorism rather than academic discussions to subdue people. So you have to see that their end goal, the Illuminati's end goal, is again based on luciferianism. The idea that Lucifer is the light bearer, Lucifer is the illuminating one, and so therefore they're trying to, I guess, shift society in a direction to what we would see biblically through the book of Revelation and through Daniel, the emergence of one who is a representation of Luciferianism and the bowing down to Satan and the spirit of Satan. And that's what we see in Revelation 13. That's what we see with the religion of Revelation 17, the harlot of Babylon. That's what we see with Daniel 7, Daniel 9, Daniel 11, and so on, okay? Um, use of violence and terrorism rather than academic discussions to change society in that direction. Now, can you say that you have seen the growth of violence, the growth of terrorism? You know, if we think back to 9/11, we have certainly seen that grow exponentially. And I don't think anybody would be, I guess, ignorant to that fact. The second one, preach liberalism to usurp political power. Now, why preach liberalism? Because, well, really, liberalism allows for the idea of, I guess, capitulation. It allows for, right, you know what, we're going to, through our liberalism, allow for the watering down of the moral code, the watering down of virtues that held up society. And this is basically what we're seeing. It's the idea of Machiavellianism again. You know, create the problem, come around the front, give I guess, a watered down answer. So you create the problem, you create licentiousness, and then you come around the front and say, well, we got to capitulate to this, and anything goes. Initiate class warfare. Now, we see this continually. The idea that it's them and us. If you look back to 2020, you saw the biggest transfer of wealth in recorded history. And who did it transfer to? It transferred to the wealthy. So it's not like it's a transfer of wealth in the sense that the poor man got rich. It is a transfer of wealth in the sense that the wealthy got wealthier. And there became this disparity between one class and another class. And the ruling elite class seemed to not only be out of touch, but I guess willingly ignorant of what the rest of society needs. Now, we in the UK, we have a prime minister who is ridiculously wealthy. But again, whenever you look at the concepts and the ideas and the regulations that he's bringing out, we'll talk about one of those, which he's proposed national service to be reinstituted if he wins the election next year for all 18-year-olds, so that and there's a reason behind that. The national service, a lot of people will think, well, if there's national service, it teaches them respect, it teaches them focus, it teaches them dedication. Well, if you've signed up to national service, if you look at the fine print of this, although there's not a lot released about it, it will leave you on the reserve list. So one of the things that's been in the news for the past 6 months is how the UK is disparagingly lower in their war preparedness than the rest of the world, specifically the likes of Russia, who we seem to be picking a fight with. You know, Putin has warned if UK continually aids by supplying weapons that are fired upon Russian soil, then Russia will fire upon United Kingdom soil, and we are doing that. And so, therefore, there was this panic about 6 months ago when you started to hear military leaders say that we need to look at reinstituting conscription by 2025 or after 2025. Well, this is a good way around it, they see politically. If they reinstitute national service, then they automatically go on the reserve list. And on the case of war or world war, then these people get pulled back in. So you see this. It's a case of the lords of old and the serfs or the servants. Okay. Any moral code, this is number 4, leaves a politician vulnerable. So politicians must be cunning. So in other words, are you noticing that there is, I guess, a chasm of empty morals within the political sphere? You know, we could look at the Hunter Biden laptop. We could look at all of the keeping documents at home that we know Biden was guilty of, even though Trump had the ability to declassify. Biden at the time didn't. Don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you could look at the lack of morality within the political sphere. Number five, this is Adam Weishaupt idea of bringing in a new world order, or establishing a Luciferian world order, dismantle existing forces of order and regulation, and reconstruct all existing institutions. Now, are you noticing a dismantling going on? Are you noticing that the police, for instance, are being politicized? They they're being used for political agendas from a top-down rhetoric, as opposed to, I guess, operating under the commission of their actual job and being the police. There is a political influencing going on, and there's a deconstruction happening. Go back to the BLM movement, and you even had in America the defund the police argument. You had the little zones being set up as independent zones in a case of rebellion. This is a form of deconstruction. Um, Number six, remain invisible until the very moment when when the movement has gained such strength that no cunning or force can undermine it. Well, I'm going to say that I think the Luciferian agenda is no longer hidden. I think you can see it, and I don't think that you have to look very hard to see it. I think that if you open your eyes, turn on your news, lift up a newspaper, or you see the agenda of schools and school boards, or you see the agenda of corporations and social media corporations, you can certainly see that agenda very openly portrayed. And like what we have been saying for some time now, the devil's not hiding anymore, and neither are those who serve him. Number seven, use mob psychology to control the masses. Well, you can see that, right? You can see it continually if you look at the continual marches, despite not knowing anything of the history of a nation or lack of a nation, and the history of the conflict or the history of the development of the area. But there's all of this marching going on, and it's the masses that control it's the idea of political correctness. We've talked about that before, so I'll not go into that. But it is again this idea that, well, if you stand out from the crowd, if you stand out from everyone else, well, you're marked. So it's a Luciferian agenda to use mob mentality to push the weak-willed and the, I guess, ignorant in one direction. Number eight, advocate for the use of drugs, moral corruption, and all forms of vice. Use this by agents to corrupt the youth. Well, if we go back, we've had the opioid epidemic. We've had the likes of big pharma being covered in the process, and their profits being protected in the process of all of this, because you know what? It's all about increasing the commercial side of this, whilst again through that class warfare, keeping a group or the populace subdued and moved in whatever direction they want. Number nine, seize property by any means to secure submission and sovereignty. Now, we saw this again happen through the pandemic in a quicker rate, and we know that they can. They're doing this in the sense that there's not just the seizing of property, but there is the buying up of farmland. We've seen this across the world. We've seen the likes of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and buy up increasing amounts of farmland across the United States. We have seen the same with Jeff Bezos. We've seen the same with Mark Zuckerberg. We've seen them all buy up farmland. Number 10, foment wars and control the peace conferences so that neither of the combatants gain territory. Well, that would mean that a politician, for instance, say there's a breakout of war, there would be an agenda for a politician to come in and, I guess, subvert any peace talks and, subvert anything of a rational solution and continue to stoke the flames of war, such as we saw with the outbreak of war between Ukraine and Russia, when Boris Johnson was we know that the Ukrainian side were about to accept terms. We know that there was about to be peace, but Boris Johnson came over and said In no way, shape, or form should you submit to this. We've got your back. Keep fighting. Where was the principle in that if it wasn't off this idea of creating an NWO? Point 11, choose candidates for public office who are useful pawns. Biden. So choose people who are easily manipulated. Maybe we'll read whatever they say on the teleprompter, including full stop, take breath, gap, pause, that sort of thing. You're seeing this now, okay? You've got the front man, but then the person in the basement, Obama, controlling everything that's on the teleprompter. Point 12, use the press for propaganda to control all outlets of public information. Now, we know that this has been an issue, right? 2020 marked the, I guess, death of the mainstream media in the sense that the mainstream media just went along with everything they were fed by those in power. And we know that what they were fed was a bunch of lies. And they still went along with it, whether knowingly or, well, I would suggest knowingly. But then there's what was I guess, a thorn in the side, or an something to put off the plans of the Luciferianists, was the rise of alternative media. So what happens? End of 2023, they bring out the likes of the Online Safety Bill, which allows for continued censorship of those online who have a counter view to the government view. The same in the sense of censorship in regards to hate speech, the Irish Hate Speech Bill, Scottish Hate Speech Bill, Canadian Hate Speech Bill. We could go on and on, all to curtail your freedom of speech, but all to only allow one voice to be heard, the voice of those in power controlling the system. So, point 13, make the masses believe they have been the prey of criminals, then restore order to appear as saviors. Now, I personally believe this is going to be something we see either this year or the beginning of next year. I believe that there will be a Black Swan event, maybe in the form of banking crash that is positioned upon, they'll say it's cyber attacks and all of this. And in fact, the UK government has right now a list of 100 different so-called catastrophes. That's the reason that we're supposed to have 3 days worth of tinned food in our houses right now. I don't know if everybody saw this. Where Rishi Sunak has said that the UK government urged the public to stock up on 3 days worth of food and tinned water. Why? Because there's 100 different catastrophes waiting to happen, one of which is cyber attacks on your banks. So they'll do cyber attacks on your banks, and then they come around the front and they say, don't worry about it. We will supply you with a central bank digital currency, and we'll even put a little bit in your bank account to cover the hardship of what you've just been through. And everybody will go, oh, look, our government's great. Because the enemy wants you worshipping politics and the politician as opposed to God. Because we know that the lawless one will come through that, being a treaty maker, being one of flattering words, Daniel 7 and Daniel 11. Okay, so let's go on. Number 15, infiltrate. So this is Illuminati plan to create a new world order. Infiltrate Freemasonry, spread atheistic materialism to the people. You see, in this plan, Freemasonry becomes the foot soldiers and those of power in a lower sphere to curtail and control the populace for the elite's wishes. Because number 16 says, when the hour strikes for Lucifer to be crowned their leader, right? Their God, whatever. The influencers, aka the Freemasons, according to this, will banish everything that stands in the way, because they'll be in positions of government and local control and council and so on and so forth. Now, I personally believe we're really encroaching upon that time right now. Number 17, use systematic deception, high sounding phrases and slogans, like what we saw through the pandemic. Over here we had act like you have the virus to keep people safe. The what is it? Face space and all of this. Well, it's a disgrace, but all of these different slogans that people took on, and it goes on, the opposite of what has been promised can be done afterwards. This is of no consequence. In other words, give everybody a soundbite, a nicely rhyming soundbite. We saw Boris Johnson do this. We saw all the governments of the world do this, and let them hold on to that while we do what we want. Like have parties in there. Number 10, like all of this, not actually adhere to what they're telling us to adhere to. Number 18, a reign of terror. It's an economical way to speedy subjugation, right? So in other words, create an environment of continual crisis. Now we've had that, right? So we've had wars, rumors of war. So even if you go back to 2020, pandemic, then we get a next variant, then we get the leaving of Afghanistan and the handing over of weapons to terrorists, and then we get all of these terror things happening throughout the world, and then wars break out. And why do wars break out between Ukraine and Russia? It's nothing to do with NATO putting their weapons on the borders of Russia, but yeah, it's a nefarious Luciferian plan. Number 19, masquerade as political, financial, and economic advisors to carry out our mandates without fear of being exposed. Now, there are different groups like this. World Economic Forum, the McKinsey Group, all of these ones that operate as advisors to government policy. And Klaus Schwab, who, by the way, people have been going, oh yes, he's stepping down, the reign of evil's over. No, it's reaching its next part of the agenda. But Klaus Schwab famously said that he's had so many young leaders from his young leaders school already, and WEF members already in cabinets of Western governments. Well, that's because they're influencing, and at the same time, they're off to the side. Number 20. The ultimate world government is the goal, right? So one world government is the goal. They're not behind the door in this. And when you hear globalism and a global agenda, maybe a World Health Assembly, maybe a United Nations goal for 2030, when you start to hear all of this rhetoric, you know that they're getting closer, or they believe they're getting closer to their goal. Ultimate world government is the goal necessary to establish huge monopolies, so wealth of others depends on them, right? So what would they need for that? Maybe something like a system of business operation that is not dependent on your own success, but maybe on the fact that you have stuck to a certain group of rules that allows you to operate in that business, such as environmental social governance rules. Diversity equity index. So even though the company may seem really affluent and doing well, their ability to continue to trade is based on their ESGs and their DEIs, right? And they're connected to the world elite. So if the world elite turn around and say, well, look, you are not doing well with your ESGs. I know that you look like you're good on paper, but you're not doing well with that. So we're going to now curtail your business to the point that you can't trade with this one and this one and this one. And therefore, the control rests in the hands of the minority. 21, use economic warfare. I'm telling you, these next 2 years, I believe that that's going to ramp up, right? So 24, the rest of 24 and 25. 22, make the people destroy each other so there will only be the proletariat left in the world with an elite sufficient and sufficient policing to protect them. This is depopulation, okay? So the idea that, like I said, that Rishi Sunak is saying that, there's going to be national service if the Conservatives remain in. And by the way, we don't do any better in the UK if Keir Starmer gets in. Keir Starmer is a known Freemason. So look at the background of Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak's business that made him a ton of money, that yes, he stepped away from for politics, is called Theleme. And it on his charter directly quotes Thelema from the false religion of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, the godfather of modern Satanism. Okay? So, in the development of his business, of which he was a partner of, they directly quote Aleister Crowley's writings and they call it Theleme based off Thelema, which is Aleister Crowley's false religion. Thelema is basically Greek for will, right? So we submit to the will of God. They don't, they believe, do what thou wilt. Okay, so you can see that there's already a satanic connection there. Then you go to Keir Starmer, who is a known Freemason, and you start to think, right, where's the altar? Who do I choose from? Well, your choices are being sculpted for you, and the idea is eventually to create, according, I know it gets censored for this, depopulation, right? Make the people destroy each other. In other words, induce wars and then call for the likes of national conscription, maybe call for conscription under war footing. So if you go back to the World War II, even though Rishi Sunak's proposing national service, the war footing in World War II went up not just to 18-year-olds and 18 to 21. It went up, I think, to under 60s. So under 60s were required to, maybe it was home guard or whatever, but to be involved in the process of defending the country and all of this. And what I'm saying to you is if you take the Albert Pike letters, a known Luciferian, right, and the Albert Pike letters talk about 3 world wars, 2 of which he predicted with very, very accurate reading. Okay, so he predicted the First World War being against the Tsars of Russia. He predicted the Second World War being against National Socialism and establishing what would be a Zionist movement. Then the Third World War being between, or kicking off between, the State of Israel and Islam. And when you start to see that in the four, you start to go, hold on a minute. Albert Pike was a Luciferian. He was also a Freemason. He was off the same approach that the Illuminati have written out here. Their workings are actually, to some extent, working, right? So their plans are actually being, I guess, openly fulfilled. But what does God say? My people perish for lack of knowledge. So it's worthwhile us knowing what our enemy is about. Sun Tzu writes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you have nothing to fear for 100 battles. Now we know how this all boils down anyway. It is only Jesus, Revelation 5, who can open the seals and establish the end of things, establish the eschatos of things, and open the seals for the first judgments to be poured out. It is only Jesus who can do this. So God is not being caught off guard with this. But a lot of Christians have their head in the sand, so I think it's worthwhile us knowing what our enemy, what the open enemy, what the Luciferian plan is all about. Um, Point 23, call what is now established a new world order and appoint a dictator. Now, I know that everybody's saying, well, look, the WHO pandemic accord, it failed, it's not going to go through. And I'm shaking my head at that. That's not exactly what happened. They had up until last Friday to come to an agreement on the amendments and the terms, and they couldn't come to an agreement. Now, interestingly, what they were differing or what they were arguing about was not the same things that would upset me and you, the giving away of national sovereignty to an unelected, untaxed body. No, it was about money. It was about the sort of giving to the WHO of vaccines that the individual nations had paid for. However, Tedros and all of the member states have committed their, I guess, vigor to completing this. They says that, so all this was a delay that they were hoping to be completed by the 27th, so that they could vote on it and sign it between the 27th and the 1st of June. But there's only a delay happening. And the thing of everybody going, oh, well, that's it. No, it's not done. It's coming. And if you actually look into something that there seems to be no disagreement about, The power of this pandemic accord rests in the hand of one individual, the Director General. It is the Director General who can call for the potential of a pandemic and say, right, we're going into lockdown. According to this accord, and this is not something, I know we have pockets of resistance around the world in the political sphere, but those that will be voting on it, this is not something that the people are upset about. They're fine with that. It rests not in a committee, it rests in the hands of one individual. This is a preparedness for that dictator state, for that dictator, aka the lawless one, aka the Antichrist. Now, anyway, point 24, fool and corrupt the youth by teaching them theories and principles we know to be false. Like Palestine was ever a place. Um, like what I continue to hear, like socialism and communism is a viable worldview and a viable approach to politics and economics. All of this is being pushed despite anybody who has read anything knowing that's absolutely false. And the final one, twist national and international laws into a contradiction which mask the law and afterwards hide it altogether. Substitute arbitration for law. Now, I'm finishing on this, okay? So if you look at this in the terms of other extra biblical prophecy, Virgil's Eclogue of 40 BC tells you that talks about the return of Apollo, the destroyer. It talks about the establishment of, I guess, a new type of people, aka the Matthew 24:37 model. And it talks about it in terms of end times, but it says that it is established via laws. Laws in this context of Eclogues, or Virgil's Eclogue, is Demas. Demas is the deity of law. Now, when you see this, you can see that there's laws being introduced that seem to be counter to logic, counter to narrative, but they're so ambiguous that they could be used for something else, and they most likely will be used for something else. But they're coming under the guise of, oh, we're bringing this in out of a legitimate issue. So, for instance, there's the anti-Semitic law that was brought in America, or there's the hate preacher law that was brought in the UK recently. All a response to viable issues, and under the guise of responding to those viable issues, anti-Semitism is evil, and anti-Semitism, even cloaked as anti-Zionism, is evil, right? But it's ambiguous law enough that it opens the way for, I guess, more control and more power sitting in the hands of the minority over the populace, and it can be manipulated down the road. Very, very similar to the hate preacher bill that Sunak was pushing in over here. Why? Because, okay, the hate as preacher rhetoric at the minute is not clearly defined over those that are maybe coming in under an anti-Zionism, anti-Semitic approach. It is simply under the term hate preacher. So what then later defines a hate preacher? Someone that speaks the biblical view on marriage, someone that speaks the biblical view on sex, someone that speaks the biblical view on judgment, somebody, that can be then viewed as a hate preacher. All of these ambiguous laws, like the clear one for me was when they first proposed the Irish hate speech bill, and they were asked to define what hatred is, and the definition was hatred is hatred. Now that's Irish, but at the same time it is completely ambiguous to the point that, well, later down the line that law will be manipulated to define whatever those in charge want to define it as. Hatred is hatred against the government. Hatred is hatred against the elite. So what I'm trying to say to you is you can clearly see these 25 constructed rules or plans of the Illuminati are very well in play. They are there for all to see. And I think that what we're seeing is them attempting to build themselves into the platform of being legitimate open luciferianism in the public sphere, and that could maybe be met when you start to see the I guess, media platforms, I guess, operating in a demonic fashion. Maybe you see someone on a song contest operating as an open Satanist, conducting a ritual on stage and proclaiming profanities galore. Maybe you see it on a music program in America where you see somebody dancing with the devil, that sort of thing, all pre framing for what's coming. Now, in all of this, we do not lose hope. Instead, we know that these are markers and signs of the coming return of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. When you start to see the rebellion of man get to this stage, you start to realize, all right, okay, the judgment is coming. And if the judgment is coming, then our commission is to go out and to preach righteousness until that day that we are caught up in the harpazo, until that day that we're removed from the scene. We are to be the restrainer of lawlessness, the sower of light and salt continually until we're gone. Why? Because you don't want anybody else believing and being led by the rhetoric of this Illuminati plan, of this demonic Luciferian agenda. You want them free and awakened to the truth of Scripture, that, okay, you can build a Tower of Babel, but you'll never be gods, because there is one God. His name is Yahweh. He is the I Am. He is the beginning and the end, the Aleph and the Tav, the Alpha and the Omega. And he is everything. He is the answer to all of your prayers, all of your problems. He is the answer to life. He is the very reason that we were created, like Adam and Eve, created to be in communion with him, to walk with him in the garden and in the dew of the garden, and to understand that that is what life is about. So we need to be aware of the time and provoked by the time to know that, look, it is short, and as it is short, we need to try and wake people up out of this issue of Babel, out of this confusion, this Babylonian confusion that is growing in the minds of man, and we need to awaken them to the truth. And the truth is a person. The truth is Yeshua. The truth is the very fact that Yahweh says Yeshua, and he is our salvation in this time. Amen. So I hope you got something from tonight. I hope so. Sorry I couldn't get all the graphics up. Problem with the computer, but hopefully this will, I guess, enlighten, even though we're not talking about the Illuminati, but enlighten you to the plans of the enemy. Know your enemy, know yourself, and you have nothing to fear for 100 battles.